In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get started on learning about the distinct and unique heritage of American Indians. Earlier, you heard Donna Cassette and I introduce ourselves. I am Ferdina Dry Romero with the Nevada Department of Education. I am from the Cayuga Band of Paiutes in northern Arizona and southern Nevada with the Moapa Band of Paiutes. Before we get started, I would like to give a little brief agenda item here. We'll talk briefly about the tribes of Nevada. We will talk a little bit about the Tuitakara, and we'll also talk some Indian education and incorporate some of the boarding school and some of the pieces that make Indian education what Indian education is today. I'll also introduce the essential understandings, provide some resources for you all, and kind of give a backing of why this all matters, why you're all here today. Donna, would you like to give a brief introduction to yourself? Since we
Yes,
introduced, but we're recording, so I want to make sure you get your introduction.
thank you. My name is Donna Cassette. I was born in Shores, Nevada, and raised in Fallon. I was born on the Indian Reservation at the Indian Hospital in Shores. I've been in the community my entire life. My mother is full-blood Paiute. We are Toi Takata, Hoop Takata, and Agai Takata, which is the cattail eaters from Fallon, the Coop Takata from the Lovelock Paiute tribe, the ground squirrel eaters, and the Agai Takata, which is the trout eaters from Waka River. I also have many relations throughout the Great Basin. My father, he's from Kentucky. He's non-native, so I'm a half-breed, if you will. But I was raised with my mother's family. And I just have worked for my tribe for about 15 years, and leaving there as the tribal chairman, I came to work with the Churchill County at the Churchill County Museum. I've been there for 18 years as the registrar, so I've been in the community my whole life, and I want to share what I know about our traditional history and our customs and our traditional life ways. I do traditional life ways, making baskets, nets, rabbit blankets, our traditional life ways, not so much as our shared life ways. But anyways, thank you for asking me. I'm honored to be here today, and I'm looking forward to interacting with the teachers in the school district. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. And Donna and I are going to kind of have this as kind of a little bit of a discussion, but as I introduced earlier, here's the agenda to kind of let us all know where we hope to go today. But before we get started, it's always really important to acknowledge all the 27 bands and colonies throughout Nevada. This here is a land acknowledgement, and we changed that word, and somehow it got changed back. But Donna, can you remind me what that was? We called it not land acknowledgement, but we called it something else.
Territorial protocol. Territorial protocol. Oftentimes, people the term land acknowledgement is more so for our tribal governments when government agencies are working with each other, and they have land acknowledgement directly to each other with our governments, whether it's with the counties, the states, the federal government, the tribes, in knowing and acknowledging the tribes and the governments within that territory that they'll be presenting in. Now, as far as the like for a number of people out here, we are not our tribal governments. Oftentimes we don't represent or speak on behalf of our tribes, only on our what we know of our tribe, and we share that, like I am today. So that would be what's the protocol. Oftentimes people are asked, what do you say, or how do you acknowledge, like what do you want to be called in the territories. And so we often ask, if you're going to be referring to someone, or find out the territory in which you are in. We are in Aboriginal Toi Takata territory, that is Northern Paiute. We go by several different names. Toi Takata is the cattail eaters, that's our band name. traditional tribal group name is the Paviotso, or what we were also named by non-natives is the Paiutes, Northern Paiutes. So that's who we are. And that's what, if there's a preference of being called anything, that's what we prefer to be called, is our first, our tribal name, second, our group name, or our Aboriginal group name, and again, our most common name. So it gets kind of confusing, but when in Rome, or when in Toitikata, do as the Toitikatas do.
Thank you so much. I somehow our slide must have got changed because we had a major discussion about that. And thank
Yes,
you
we
so
did.
much for clarifying that. I do want to further acknowledge the land that should be in coordination with tribal groups where we are now. We recognize the following map. I included this. They're older maps. We're in the process of creating some newer ones, but you'll see the Numa, which is also known as the Northern Paiute, the Nuwu, Nuwu, the Southern Paiute, the Washishu, which is the Washoe people, and the Nuwu. New, I can't say it correctly. I apologize. I'm not Shoshone, but that is Western Shoshone. So on this page are variations of different maps. And the one in the center we'll talk a little bit further about with the very colorful colors. I don't know if it's to your right or left, but it's with the green, with the Lake Tahoe. That is where the Washishu, their traditional land territory is. And in the middle of what is now Nevada is the Shoshone people. And then we have to the bottom left on my screen is the Southern Paiutes, and that's where I'm from. And then we have the more northern territories with the different Paiute nations in that area. So just for your little information, we're not going to go into great detail, but it's really important to kind of know the territory of where you're from. I did put in the chat a native land where you could click on it, and it's a really good little identifier of where people are at in our country and in our world. Here is a picture that depicts shared land. It was adapted from the Nevada State Museum. Donna, I know you worked under the One Sky exhibit, and I know that you have pretty big ties to this map. Could you tell us a little bit about this map?
Yes, during 1999 and 2000, we met with the Department of Cultural Affairs at the time within the state of Nevada at the Nevada State Museum in creating an exhibit, what is known today as the Under One Sky exhibit. And I'm proud to see that almost 20 years later, that it is 20 years later that the exhibit is still running, because it was only slated for 2 years. But during this whole process of creating the exhibit, there was cultural sensitivity topics that we had to embark on. We're having to bridge the relationship between the Nevada State Museum and the local tribes, or with the tribes within the state of Nevada, and because there wasn't a good relationship. And in doing so, in trying to articulate our Aboriginal territories within the Great Basin, because as Native people, we do not see boundaries. We do not, those are not our boundaries in our traditional way of thinking. It's more of a Western way of thinking. And so to try and look at a map and say, draw a line, we couldn't reasonably do that, because what we have is shared territory, those little fuzzy spots between the yellow and the blue and the yellow and the reds and the blue and the green. Those are shared territories. So we had this discussion to kind of make it a blurred map, if you will. And the hard lines are the ones that the colonial, society placed upon our Aboriginal territories. So that's why we went with those colors, and we didn't put hard lines in there, because we also travel within those borders as well.
Thank you, Donna.
Well,
We had this recreated and adapted with permission from the Nevada State Museum. and had one of our students, native students, do this as one of his projects. So we're hoping to keep the same concept, but have it updated as well. So you'll be available to you in a different look. So here's a contemporary look at the tribes today. All but one were established under executive order. On the left-hand side of this part where it says Southern Paiute, Northern Paiute, Shoshone, those are all tribal groups. And in the middle are the reservation, bands, colonies, and on the right-hand side are the additional lands from some of those. So for instance, the Tamok tribe has 4 different bands, and they're in 4 different locations in our state. Reno Sparks has additional land called Hungry Valley that was created a little bit later after their establishment. And the Washoe tribe is similar to the Tamok. They have all the different colonies as well: Carson, Dresselville, Stewart, and Woodfords. So to give you kind of a bigger view of our tribes in Nevada.
Ferdina, I do want to interject something really quick, that those tribes also assumed other smaller bands, like within our territory of the Toy-Takutta. There's more than just the Toy-Takutta that were here. We have the Puku-Takutta, which is the duck eaters from Carson Lake. There were also bands along the Carson River, like Fox Wangi. His band of Paiutes were up further along the Carson River. So just because we are known as our Aboriginal tribes as Toy-Takutta, we also assume those other tribes within our bands as well, because when non-natives came to this territory, they were forced onto these places, and it was a big major shift when that happened. So what you see today is the tribes that have assumed all of those other smaller bands and they may not even be that small. They may have just been forced off their territory because they were on prime real estate.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That brought something to mind about Southern Nevada, where I'm from. My grandmother was born in Las Vegas under tamarack trees, and on the land that was the Helen Stewart, the Stewart family ranch. And so, and also the Pahrump tribe was very close in proximity, but because of the establishment of reservations, they are not a federally recognized tribe. So there's a lot of the land that it's very significant to the tribal people, and that means territorial land as well. So it's a lot of information. So I'm not going to get too much into detail about that because we can go on an entire different tangent. I do want to recognize some of the first of Nevada's first reservations, and I did include the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe that was established in 1887. And I'm going to allow Donna to talk a little bit more about that. But before I do, the Moapa River Paiute Indian Reservation was established in 1873, Walker River 1874, Pyramid Lake 1874, and the Duck Valley Reservation, which is the Shoshone Paiute. But it became Paiute a little bit later. It was established earlier on, and then again reestablished to include the Paiute as well. And prior to that, in my notes above that, you'll notice that the Pyramid Lake and the Walker River areas were established way before the 1873 date and before they were established in 1877. So, this is another really cool lesson to incorporate into your lessons about our first reservations. Donna, can you tell us a little bit more about the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe that was established in 1887?
Yeah, with regards to the Fallon tribe, we were considered when we were established as a sub-agency to Pyramid Lake and to Walker River, which means we were not dealt with, or we didn't have an Indian agent on our reservation initially. And later throughout the history or throughout time, we got our federal recognition. Our federal recognized name is the Paiute Shoshone Tribe of the Fallon Reservation and Colony. So if you look them up under federal recognition, that is our title, the Fallon, or the Paiute Shoshone Tribe of the Fallon Reservation and Colony. The reservation, we were established. We are not an executive order tribe. We are not a treaty tribe. We are not an IRA tribe under the Indian Reorganization Act. We were established in 1887 through the Homestead Act. So given our land base, there were about 96 individuals who received 160 acre allotments. Later, those allotments were retracted by the federal government and issued as a land giveaway underneath the Newlands Project. So our land that was given to us was taken away, and then we were placed further downstream along the Carson River, literally in the middle of the desert with no resources, on what we have is 6,500 acres, or probably more so now, as a land base. And we were promised water rights underneath the Newlands Act, and later we did not get our entire water rights. That's why there is legislation. We are a part of the Public Law 101618 that was approved in 1990, establishing compensation for our water loss, because we were promised land to every track of 10 acre allotments, and we were not given that. And so again, we had to fight for that. So again, we are not an IRA tribe, whereas all of the tribes in the state of Nevada are also considered an IRA tribe. In 1932, our tribes had to vote for this law. And what it did was give the federal government helping the tribes establish our governments as we see them now in a colonial way, where you see the democratic processes happening, elections happening, you have a constitution. Our tribe denied that, so we are not under the Indian Reorganization Act. So what we did was we approved a resolution, which we call is a manner of review, where we adopted those underneath our tribal law and order, to where we had kind of the same thing, but not quite as stringent as the underneath the Indian Reorganization Act. So that's a little bit about our tribal and our tribal government, the establishment of it.
And you talk about tribal government and the establishment of, for everybody's knowledge, a lot of our tribes that came prior to the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act established boilerplate constitutions. And today those are being revised to fit the needs of our people. So, and again, that's a whole entire different conversation and discussion. So when when our kids are coming to school, these are real life situations. You see the establishments of the reservations, you see the establishments of our constitutions and our eventually bylaws that would come. They were enacted way long time ago. So that kind of shows how the sovereignty of our tribes are operating even to today. They're falling under the policies from that were established way back in the 1800s. So again, another time in another series. But before we get started in anything further, I wanted to also give you a glimpse of Indian education as it is today. We have the U.S. Department of Education Indian Education Office, and that office oversees like the Title VI programs. It oversees Native American language. It does the STEP, the State Tribal Education Partnership Program, which we're hoping that Nevada will eventually one day have in some certain areas. It also oversees the Indian Education National Activities, the National Advisory Council on Indian Education. These are all big areas that make and kind of help create and have funding sources that run into your district. So that's just one component. We have myself at the SCA. Um, we have many other states that have similar positions, and some actually have offices that are committed to Indian education. Then we have your local education agencies that have the funding sources from funding that comes out of the US DOE. And then, for instance, we have Title VI, the grant in your program, which our friend Carlene Pacheco oversees, and I'll introduce it a little bit later. We also in our state have the Nevada Indian Commission, which is where our Indian Education Advisory Committee lives. And so that is being appointed. We have many committee members throughout the state active in this committee. Some of the state statutes that we oversee in our Department of Ed or on the following page, just to give you a glimpse. Our friend Leslie in your district helped our Department of Ed write some pieces to the program curricula for Indian education. We had put together a team from around the districts in our state to come up with the history and contemporary lifestyles of the tribes in Nevada. So this NRS was very interesting because it was written in the 1970s, where it did require the superintendent for public instruction to work with American Indian tribes to establish programs and curricula designed to meet the unique educational needs of American Indians. And as you probably are aware, the State Department of Ed doesn't create curricula, so it was really an interesting project. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing for this piece a little bit later in the presentation. But I do want to mention also that we have the Great Basin Native American languages in our school districts. One in particular is the Washoe County School District, who has 3 schools, high schools, that have the Paiute language for world language. And so on the screen, you'll see some of those NRSs that support that. I'm not going to spend too much time here. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me. So Donna, tell us a little bit about the Toy Dakota.
Well, thank you very much. We've been in this territory within what most people know as the Lahontan Valley since time immemorial. Or if you know the area and you're familiar with its landscape, if you look to the east, there's a large mountain, and it's known as Job's Peak on the maps. We call it Wa'inikutukwa. That's where our mother and father created us in their eyes and in their vision. And these are very sacred hills and mountains. There were natural formations that were on the very top of this mountain. Fox Peak is what we know it as today. And I think most people are familiar with our gas station here in town and our cinema known as Fox Peak. And we named it that because it's that important to our people. And there were some natural formations, pillars, if you will, forming to mother and father, and they were blown up in 1952 by the local military at that time. They were almost as if they were our deities, and we were not apologized to. They didn't know what they were doing, but that really hurt our people spiritually in a very deep way. But our people have been living in this area since time immemorial. We don't have stories of coming from another location. We don't have stories stating we've overtook anybody. We've just been here. That's what our stories are. And our old origin stories go back to a time where we had a relationship, an intimate relationship with the animals. So we were able to talk with the animals. So those are our oldest origin stories, and it talks about places, the locations, the waters. We also found that linguistically, we're tied to a bigger platform, not just within the Great Basin as we know it. It continues on into Mexico and over to New Mexico with the Tohono O'odham. and down as far as the Seri people in Mexico. And they have stories of coming from the Great Lakes of the North. Now, what would be the Great Lakes of the North in this part of the United States or this continent, North America? That would have been the ancient Lake Lahontan that would have been here over 21,000 years ago and started to dry up in the valley about 12,000 years ago. We have occupation within our territory for over 14,000 years ago. There is petroglyphs in the Winnemucca Lake area that have been tested and on tufa, and they were over 14,000 years old. We have testing that was done on some of our oldest human relatives here, and they were to be over 10,000 years old. Our occupation is not a surprise to us. We are very comfortable in knowing who we are, where we come from, and where our Aboriginal territory is. The things that have been imposed upon our tribes and our Native people in the area have been extremely insulting and very hard, because we also have to deal with the hardships of bearing the burden of giving people the authority to destroy our relatives after they're dead. And that's something nobody will have to live with but us. We have that burden of ghost sickness, of even speaking about them and carrying that burden on until, all of our relatives are brought home. We have places, we have territories, we have families, we have relationships. Some of the things we are known for is Toitiketa, the cattail eaters. If you could see in this picture, you could see those long, tall reeds. Those are cattails. We built our lives around them. We lived in the Stillwater Wildlife Area as it's known today, and that plant provided shelter, clothing, shoes, boats, bed mats, food in many forms, and it was a very useful tool. And it's not something that was specific to our territory. It's a plant that's used around the world. It's a very useful plant, and it was put here by the creator, and we were using it. In other territories, like in the Lovelock area, there's the Saitika, which are the the Chuli eaters, and they grow together. The cattails and the Chulis always grow together. The Saitika, contrary to popular belief, they are Northern Paiute. They are not some freakish non-natives, giant people. The Saitika, they are here. The last known chief of that tribe is Captain Sioux, and he was here at the time and after occupation of non-natives. Our sister tribe is the Kootkata tribe. We have origin stories tying us to both the Stillwater and to the Kootkata tribe in our origin story. So they are our sister tribe here in this territory. We've lived in this area since time immemorial because we had sanctuary. This was our Eden. We had everything to live, everything to thrive because of the marsh. It's on a major migratory fly path for shorebirds. So seasonally, we have an enormous amount of waterfowl. And with that, they have their eggs and they have their babies here. So we have eggs. We have vegetables in the plants. We have seeds in the harvest seasons during the fall time up into the mountains. That came in about between 300 to 1,200 years ago. We had protection because of the Great Basin. As the water started to dry up, we had sanctuary, because if you're coming from the east and you didn't know where the water sources were, you will perish. It was as simple as that. You will perish. If you were coming from the west, you had to go down either the Carson, the Truckee rivers, and you're going to be meeting other bands of Paiutes before you get to the Toitiketa. And if you're coming from the south, the same there. You're going to be meeting up with the Alaitiketa. And in the north, we had, again, the Saitika and the Kootika. And in order to get to us in our little cubby hole right there in the still waters, you really had to be on your best behavior in order to penetrate that part of the Great Basin early on in our history. It's not an easy place to get to. It's not an easy place to visit back then. And we literally had sanctuary because there was no outlet. The Great Basin is called the Great Basin because there is no major water sources going to the ocean, which means trade was a harder prospect to engage upon, in which we did have trade, but it wasn't as easy as if you were to follow a river to inland to the ocean or vice versa. So with that, as the pioneers came through this territory, they were able to exploit those rivers as they seen it, because it always seemed like within the Great Basin, the territory surrounding it was already visited, was already exploited, and have had impact. And the Great Basin was the last to be visited because of the fact that it was hard to navigate through this territory. And after the riches in the Sierras of silver and the gold rush started coming through is when we had the major impacts. That thoroughfare that came through, if you can imagine 170,000 people in just one season going through your territory, devouring resources which were once plentiful. So the resources were being harder and harder to come by. And the tribes that were met along those routes going into California, they were also having more and more hardships. So they had to move and find and produce their own. They had to go outside of their banned territories just to survive. We have intimate stories around this whole entire Great Basin. We have stories of places, water sources, things that ceremonially happened. And we have an intimate tie to this land. And we are a part of this land because we are its DNA and it's our DNA. And it's simple as that. And we have a responsibility to take care of these territories. But after the occupation happened, there was I remember reading a report given by General Douglas in 1859 where they wanted to gather all the northern Paiutes or Pavioso and put them in the Truckee Meadows as we know it today. So that was supposed to have been our territory, was the Truckee Meadows. But the Truckee Meadows was a shared territory up and over into past Truckee was Paiute territory, and it was named after one of my grandfathers, Captain Truckee. He was the father of Chief Winnemucca and Wahi. And so with that, it's kind of, listening to some of your relatives helping natives, but in the end, having such hardships because we wanted to befriend our brothers who approached this part of the territory. And it was for a while until people recognized the prospect of riches within our territory. And then all bets were off. The water is a major resource within the Great Basin. It needs to be cherished back then and today. One of the things that happened was the exploitation of resources in Lake Tahoe. Those were in Lake Tahoe, they exploited the timber that was there to be hauled out to Virginia City for the mines that were happening. And this timber and this processing mill bottlenecked the Truckee River, and the mining of the Virginia City poisoned our rivers in the Carson River. So hardships were going to happen shortly thereafter. The what happened with the Truckee River was there was like a cork at the mouth of the river because the sawmills floated the timber downstream, and all of the waste or the byproduct of the mills were put into the water. So it had to be dredged. In doing so, it stopped the spawning of the old Lahontan cutthroat trout because they spawned all the way up to Truckee, or excuse me, to Lake Tahoe. And those, I think, in later time had to be reintroduced to Pyramid Lake. And at one point, I think in Pyramid Lake, the fish there, the kuyui, had to be put on the endangered species list because of that fact. But in the Carson River, in which we have today, I mentioned both because we now use both of those water sources. In Toyotacutta territory in Stillwater, it was as reported by one of our elders, Wizzy George. She lived to be 110 years old. And she told a story of when she went into the mountains, her family went into the mountains to harvest some pine nuts. And as they came back, everybody in their community was dead. The poisoning of the water was something that happened. And in fact, if you go over to Fort Churchill, they even have reports that even though they're right next to the river, they didn't drink directly from the river. They had to dig wells away from it in order to filtrate that poison out of it. And we're in the Great Basin. We're at the terminus of our water sources, and we cannot afford today to exploit and to harm those waters. It's now all of our shared history. Our story is now everybody's story, and we have to protect those waters. But it was probably because of the mining upstream, which ultimately poisoned the river, which is now listed on as a Superfund site. The Carson River is a Superfund site. The Truckee River is, the Walker River is, and I understand the Humboldt River is or is going to be listed as a Superfund site. As our family units, traditionally, we were there. The makeup of the bands is the children, the mothers and the fathers, and the grandparents. The mothers and the fathers, they're more so of the workhorse of the family. They bear the burden of collecting and packing and getting the bulk of the food and preparing it, and a lot of the hard work of collecting the heavier stuff, like the bigger logs or wood or that type of stuff. The grandparents were the ones who were the teachers. They're the nurturers. More so were the grandmothers. They were the nurturers. Within our community society, it was not a patriarchal or a matriarchal. They were equal. Our bands were equal because the knowledge that was shared with the children started at the time they were able to speak or even be talked to, and those lessons about their environment started at a very, very young age. There wasn't there wasn't anything that was not talked about. Like even your sexuality was not an issue within our communities, whereas later we were taught that because our women traditional dress was a skirt and open breasted, but it was offensive to the pioneers because it was provocative, I guess. And so we did not view our bodies as the Western way viewed their bodies. And so that was imposed upon us as another thing of shame, and that we should be shameful for, having breasts or those types of things, because we didn't view that as that. These are necessities, these are life, and they weren't something that was used in a foreign way. And so later you'll see the clothing even changed for our people as well. But the upbringing and the nurturing was delivered by the grandparents, more so by the grandfathers in the wintertime when the stories were being told of the land, of the animals, our relationship to the land and the animals, and stories of when you gather plants, One, when you pick it in the springtime, it can be very hardy and healthy, whereas if you pick it in the fall, it could very well kill you. So you need to know your environment, your plants. They're also messengers within our community because we live in such a fast-paced world as it is today. People forget to slow down and observe our environment around us at a natural level, meaning you have to know why, a meadowlark comes down and sings in this valley, and you notice it. Because when they come and they sing in this valley, if you know what a meadowlark is, that means it's time to go pick pine nuts. Or at the same time, we have messengers and plants. When you start seeing the rabbit brush bloom down here in the valley, again, it's time to go pick pine nuts up in the mountains. So this intimate knowledge that we had with the land, the men would put the women and the children and the family unit above all. They would sacrifice their life to preserve their family units. And as pioneers came through this territory, and one of my relatives, being that she was the daughter of Chief Winnemucca, Sarah Winnemucca. Again, one of my grandfathers is Wahi, brother to Chief Winnemucca. And Sarah Winnemucca was able to have the opportunity to go into San Jose, into California with her father and her grandfather, and they were able to see the pioneers' development there. She went to a mission school and she was able to learn several languages, not only English, but Spanish and several, I think even German. I think it was a total of 6 languages she learned. And with that knowledge, she was able to see the industry being built around in that territory. And when they came back to her territory in the Humboldt Sink, which is Lovelock or the lower valley in the Big Meadows, she wanted more for our people. She's seen the suffering. And so she wrote a book, and it was called Life Among the Paiutes. She was the first Native American author to write a book, first Native American woman in the United States to write a book. And that was, I think, in 1883. And within it, she did have a passage in there where it said, I wish I could gather all my people, travel them, put them on a boat, travel beyond Cape Horn up to Ellis Island so my people can walk through Ellis Island and become people of this now new nation. And she was fighting. She traveled to Washington, D.C. She was an advocate. She partnered up with a well-known lady called Elizabeth Peabody in Boston. Elizabeth was able to help Sarah in having her very first school in this territory. Sarah, through her work, was advocating and was appealing to the United States government. At the same time, the Indian Boarding School Act kind of came into play. And she was pleading with the government that the children that she taught in her school, which were my grandmothers, because we have stories of them going to her school. My grandmother, I remember when I was in Washington, D.C., I found letters my great-grandmother, Yadatsomi, was writing to the federal government. And I go, wow, she was writing these letters. And sadly, it was because she was inquiring on the murder of her son in the city jail. But regardless, very impressed because Sarah communicated that the children were able to learn more, learn faster within their community, and they learned faster because they were able to stay at home. They were able to have an immersion of not only in their Numayarawan, of their traditional language, that's their speaking their own language in Paiute, and they were able to learn bilingual languages. She was teaching them both English, and they were learning the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic at the time, and they loved it because they were able to share not only with each other as children, but they shared with their family. They essentially became educators within their family units. So the whole family benefited from attending Sarah's school. But those pleas were not heard, they were ignored, and the Indian boarding school went into play. So what happened in our communities in the Great Basin here was our children were rounded up. Some families have stories of seeing a little green buggy coming down the road to pick up all the children, to steal them and take them away to the Stewart Indian School. Some people have very fond stories, some people not so much. Some people lost family there, as within ours and within my family. My grandmother went to a boarding school. So if you can essentially think of, if you're wanting to have, uh, if you're wanting to annihilate a community or a people, the first thing is to take away their language. And then secondly is to take away their identity. And that happened. I am a product of the Indian boarding school. So if you can imagine, I know half of what my mom knows, and my mom knows half of what her mom knows, and her mom knows half of what her mom knows. So if people ask, why don't you know your language? Why don't you know your Aboriginal stories or your, these things that you should have already inherently known? This is why. Because within one generation, it was able to annihilate many of that through the language barrier. I asked my grandmother how that felt for her, and she said her language, she was Paiute speaking was her, that was her first language. And then as she, at the young age of 6 years old, was sent to the Stewart Indian School, and she no longer spoke her language. It was Paiute in English, and it was broken. And so she wasn't able to hear the stories of the meadowlarks. She wasn't able to hear the stories about the plants. She wasn't able to share those stories with her daughter. And my mother wasn't able to share them with me. And so as we continue our life, we also, unfortunately, have these little pockets of knowledge, and they're within every one of our communities. Those people who were hidden from the Indian boarding school. Wizzy George was one of them in Fallon. My great aunt Helen Williams in Lovelock was one of those in that community. She was protected by her mother. She was an only child. My grandmother was one of 12 and one of 7 of the ones that survived. And so they were able to share and maintain this knowledge, and they're jewels, and we're losing them, unfortunately, at a rapid pace because of this pandemic and because of older age. And for our tribe, in our language, we quite literally have one person left on our reservation who speaks fluent Toitikata dialect. Because even though we have, the Numa speaking language or the Paiute language, there are different dialects. As in, if you were to say the color red, Atsakwirad would be our dialect, or it's Atsakwichad is another dialect. So there's different variations of that. But nonetheless, we today will speak as much as we can. It'll be confusing to our elders and they'll laugh at us, and we don't care because we laugh with them. And this is what we have to do to preserve our language, because so often I heard in speaking to our elders that there's something that's missing when it's translated into English. It loses its beauty and its essence of a word, because it means, so it's more descriptive and colorful was what they said, rather than just a word. And so it's pretty important to our children that we are able to have these programs of speaking language. And I hope, and one of the things as I was growing up in the school district and learning about a lot of stuff about Indian education, is I felt as a young child that I was picked on in a way, because I was zeroed out. I was put in the special needs programs because the school district got extra money teaching those little Indian children. And so you were stigmatized at a very young age of, oh, you had to be placed in the special room in the special class because you're a special needs person. And that stigma follows you. And to be punished within the school district was another thing. So it was quite interesting. I protected my children from that because I never wanted to see them have to be exposed to that kind of treatment, because and that was a really hard one for me to understand and overcome. But I was, and as many of the other Native childrens were, we were all sitting in the same little bubble room, everybody looking at you.
Thank
But
you.
our
That's that's one of the reasons why we have these types of professional developments, so that we can have a little bit better understanding of kind of where we came from as a people and where we are today, where we hope to go. Um, and I know we're all of that was great information, and it just brought so many things to mind. Reservation land, even the traditional things. This is a miniature basket, Shoshone style basket. Our babies are still carried in this. I was a baby in this basket. This is a miniature winnowing basket. It goes on your back, or a burden basket goes on your back. You gather material. Here's another miniature. This is a winnowing, where you do the winnowing of that. This is a basket hat that my people wore down in the South. And I don't know if any of the Northern Paiutes wore this, but I thought it was worth mentioning.
Yeah,
Um,
we would wear them in the Pinot Hills. We
okay,
went pine knitting, so we wouldn't get it in our
makes
hair.
sense. Makes sense. So I know we don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm going to just go through briefly. And I want you all to also know that we are in the process of putting together professional development opportunities, really quick segments of such as learning about Sarah Winnemucca. I brought a piece up. Education hasn't done it for all, so that was her quote.
I do want to mention something with regards to the Churchill County Museum. We have worked on, in 2019, a virtual reality program. And I'm not sure if the teachers have seen it in the Churchill County Library and in our museum, but there's 3 stations throughout the county, one at the Churchill County Museum, Churchill County Library, and the Fallon Paiute Shoshone Library on the reservation. And if you want, you can go and visit these 3 locations and take a virtual reality tour of the hidden cave. And another thing we're trying to do, because the pandemic really tossed up a lot of our plans at the museum, is we are engaging in a hidden cave days coming in 2022 in October. It's going to be at the end of the first quarter, and we will have tours of the hidden cave, tours of the museum, and we want to make like it a couple day, if not a day, so that teachers can all come together and take a tour of the hidden cave, because this is our history here within Churchill County, and we need to start building our cheerleaders, our champions who can speak about our homelands for us, because this is all of our territory now. We have if people are interested in volunteering for the church with the Churchill County Museum or want to know more about this, you can reach our our museum education curator. Her name is Gretchen Felty, and she can be reached at education@ccmuseum.org, or contact us by calling the museum at 423-3677. And but these are some exciting things. We're also looking at we're also working on a workbook, and it's through one of our icons at the museum. Her name is Beatrice Badger, and her adventures in our community. So Gretchen is writing a book on this, and we were also talking about creating curriculum. Is this something that our Churchill County offices or our teachers would like within the district? If so, we would like to work and see what you want to have in this curriculum. If it's something that's excitable to you and wanting to teach about our own local tribes and teaching our own history to our own children so that we all can be champions within our community. And so if you want, again, the telephone number is 423-3677, and you can contact Gretchen Felty, and she's
And
our
then
or
if you
she's our
if you could put that in the chat, that would be great for people to have
okay,
as a
I sure
resource.
will.
We're going to move real quickly into this next section, and we're not going to go into detail. But what was happening with Indigenous children that changed the past, present of their culture, language, and family structure? And that was the history of Indian education with the boarding schools. And I want to play this short segment. Just a really quick piece. Well, actually, I'll play it a little bit later. I want to kind of get into this. I apologize. I'll put the link in the chat so you can look at it later. So the sentiments of Lippincott in the quotation reflects the Richard Henry Pratt's 1892 statement, "Kill the Indian, save the man," which was Pratt's belief toward the policy on Indian education. Um, there is a short clip that I'm going to also put in the chat. I would like you to take a look at it later on and reflect on it about how it makes you feel. In the clip that you could look at later, it's from Into the West series that explains kind of the Richard Henry Pratt, who he was and how he established the first off-reservation boarding school. Clearly, that metaphor of "kill the Indian, save the man" was cruel, but it was a characteristic of the time when society was highly critical of the civilization of our Indian people. And I say "our" because I'm Native American as well. Um, so when you get a chance, and one of the things I like to think about it when I'm watching this clip is like, how would I feel if this was my children going off when they were just little babies? What would I feel? So please copy that, keep it for later, and watch it. So the first boarding school experience, students were required to cut their hair and to change their native names to Christian names. Cutting the hair had a very traumatic effect on the children because in most communities, cutting the hair meant a family member had passed on. When their hair was cut, the children were that they were thinking that someone had died. No one told them differently, and the connections to their family had been completely cut off. So, Carlisle, this picture is from Carlisle, and that school ran from 1879 to 1918 with over 10,500 students who had been enrolled. So, a little personal information about myself. My grandmother traveled by wagon to what is now, I'm going to just go through this really quick, um, from Fort Mojave, which is, geez, I can't remember now what the number it is. I can't see. Um, Fort Mojave, all the way from the Kaibab Indian Reservation. She was born in 1912. She wore the old boarding school garb. My great great grandmother, she attended the Sherman Indian Boarding School, which is number 19. And she also had the old garb as well. So ultimately, the Indian boarding school experience was instrumental in destroying the traditional family model for the Indian students. And really, of course, like Donna had mentioned earlier, the students' culture and heritage was almost nearly lost. So now we work really hard to um, maintain, to revitalize that sometimes, some of the lost culture and heritage that was left. When students returned from the boarding schools to their parents and communities, many had lost their sense of connection to the language and their traditional ways. So a lot was taken from them. I have so much more to go into this, but I know our time is running low. This is a map of the United States in 1892. However, it does show distinct of where all of those schools were. And you'll see number one being Carlisle Institute, Clear in Pennsylvania. And we did have people from Nevada attend Carlisle. So just kind of um, take a look at, some of the pieces to that. So I can't go into major conversation, but really the history of Indian education could be understood through several major federal and policies, especially during the assimilation period. And although the boarding school era was clearly marked by the establishment of Carlisle Institute in 1879, Indian education began as early as the 17th century and continued into the 1800s with mission schools, military academies, etc. Um, this is our first school in Nevada that was a federal Indian boarding school, an off reservation boarding school, and it opened in 1890 all the way till 1980. And so I am going to also put another link into the chat for you to watch Our Home, Our Relations, a permanent exhibit. You can actually watch the whole documentary, and it'll tell you about the history of Indian education. The first half and the second half is really based on the Stewart Indian Boarding School. My parents both attended the Stewart Indian Boarding School. My parents went to school when they were just little guys, 8 years, eighth grade. Um, so it's please take a look at that as well, and I'll put that in the chat in addition. Um, again, this is many of our families have come from this first boarding school experience. As Donna mentioned, my family, uh, and many others. So again, another before and after look of why, them when they first arrived, and another picture depicting this became an actual thing where they would go and provide this type of picture to show actually get funding for these schools. So it was very interesting. I'm going to introduce, and again, I'm getting excited about how I'm going to be able to provide this. This is the Essential Understandings. It was adapted from the Montana Indian Education for All. So now many of our states look at essential understandings. And so there's actually 7 that we have. And this one is just kind of highlighted to show you that there is great diversity amongst our 4 tribal nations in Nevada, in their languages and the cultures and the governments. And each tribe has a very distinct and unique cultural heritage because of the land base of where they were. And again, please reference that a little bit further. There's diversity. There's all these different other 7 essential understandings. I talked a little bit about this curriculum guide that we developed. So I'm excited that now we are through our ARP ESSER fundings. Our State Department of Education is creating a Native curriculum enhancement project. So next year, this presentation will look a lot different with all the resources that we compile with the help of experts like Donna and other people in their tribes to make this curriculum much more rich and meaningful and helpful to our educators in Nevada. So please, if you are interested in helping create some of the curriculum, and we're going to be partnering with Donna with the museum as well. Hopefully we haven't talked in great detail, but this is starting up this year. We will be hiring a person to do this work, and we're very excited about this. A really great resource is We Are Water Protectors. We talked a lot about, the about kind of the how do we protect. Here's a really great resource. I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat here so you can take a look at this. Please take a look at it. You can do it yourselves. How do you become water protectors? Here's some discussion and questions and topics. and a great way for your children to become interactive. How are you going to be, a water protector? So if we had a lot of time, we would do this together, but we don't have a lot of time. So we for Native American Heritage Month, we do a lot of celebrating Indigenous pieces, and one of them was through literature. So in March, we're hoping to, or actually, we have an Indian Education Summit that's for March, but we're going to schedule it for April. And so we're hoping to be able to bring some really top-notch presenters to provide, and here's one of them. We also have the National Indian Education Association, who is very big on making sure that curriculum is happening in our country. And we ask, why does this all matter? When our kids don't see themselves in the curriculum, they often are not part, they don't feel like they're a part of the conversation, the discussion. So it's our hope that with our ARP ESSER funding, that we'll be able to support that for our students. I do want to take a moment to introduce Carlene. I know some of you know her very well. Carlene?
Hello, I'm here. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm Carlene Pacheco. I'm the Title VI Indian Education Liaison at Churchill County High School. Currently, I am over the district right now since we have the other liaison position is open. But I just wanted to share that, so I'm a member of the Fallon Tribe, and I am Paiute and Meskwaki, but I'm enrolled with the Fallon Tribe. So I come from the standpoint of, I was a quiet and reserved student that was raised by my grandparents, very similar to the students that I am serving now. So I can easily relate to them and fill in the gaps of their needs. So if you have any questions about any students in your classroom or having trouble building a connection, I can help do that. I can help you build that connection with that student, and I feel that I am a great resource for the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlene. I really appreciate working and you're the people allowing us to work with you. I'm going to put up our contact information, and you are more than welcome to contact either one of us, including Carlene. I included her email there as well. I do want to acknowledge Melissa Malero, who is from the Fallon Tribe. These are her artwork. Carlene offered the pictures. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I apologize we didn't get to every single thing. I look forward to providing this information, more information further to your school district. Thank you, and have a great rest of your professional development.